Okay, everyone, so we'll get started shortly now. So we've got 30-minute sessions for each of the professional officers, and we are going to have to fairly fly through everyone. So be sure to keep your questions specific to the area that they're covering. Again, keep all your questions to the Q&A box, and I'll relay the questions to that professional officer at the end of their session. So we are on quite a tight schedule for the afternoon. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Colm. So Colm, I'm just going to spotlight you here so that everyone will get to see you. There we go.
Hello, you can hear me, yeah? Great stuff. Okay, I'm pleased to see this morning so many questions related to building conservation projects and an interest in the heritage value of buildings. And I'm fully aware that my colleague
Colm, sorry, you're muted there for some reason. We lost your sound.
Sorry.
Just as soon as you said my colleague, that's what we got.
Okay, well, I'm just saying that I'll be talking about buildings. I'm the first of my colleagues who have different interests, so I hope I won't be hogging the discussion, but I am aware from the chat and the questions this morning that many of you are interested in carrying out works to conserve buildings. It is a community heritage grant scheme, and that is the first perhaps frame around what we're doing. So we won't be supporting buildings that are in private ownership, unfortunately. The building, you have to be able to demonstrate that the building is of communal interest. There's a lovely phrase in a charter called the Faro Convention that talks about heritage as being public, and that different parts of the heritage have heritage communities who own or possess them, even if not literally. And if you can describe yourself as being part of a heritage community that has an interest in a particular building, then that's where you're trying to demonstrate that. But it won't do for the renovation of a house or a ruined cottage. It has to have a public value. I'm an architect. I like reading, but boy, do photographs and maps communicate with me so much more quickly, and with, I think, my colleagues as well. We love seeing maps that show where a place is, and if you can use a historic map, for example, one that you get from heritagemaps.ie to describe your building and its place in its immediate world, it makes it so much more meaningful for us. Now, you need to convey information through the map, specifically where a thing is. That's important. But you can sometimes make a map richer by showing historic context. And that can be important to us and helpful in describing the value of your building. Similarly with photographs, they're so important to us establishing what it is that you're trying to protect or to conserve or to enhance. And it'd be great, the good photographs of a building. Now, I'll give you an example from my backdrop here. This is Green's Bridge in Kilkenny, and that's what I would call an oblique photograph of the bridge. It's making it sciaways, it's a parallelogram. But the little white building in the background is the Heritage Council's office. And the photograph, I mean, it's not a good photograph and it's not a complete photograph of the whole building, but something that goes face on and shows each of the four or the multiple sides of a building is so informative to describing what it is, how old it is, what the problem in the last few months who was saying, we don't know what to apply for. We don't know who to apply to get help. When we look at grants, it's community and heritage. And I think conservation, community heritage and conservation are the really important words. And so to show to us that what you're doing is important for your piece of heritage. It's really good if you can do a condition report, as I would call it, something that describes the whole thing. And I'm trying to talk now like about a pond or a wetland as much as about a building. Something that describes the whole thing. And how they go together to make up the whole thing, and why it's important that a part is in good condition or repaired in order to make the whole thing better. So a condition report for a building is usually a really good way of getting a comprehensive view of the building. And we'll know if there's dry rot in the basement as well as a hole in the roof. We can see that the windows need repairing, but also that the roof is in good condition, etc., etc. And that condition report is very useful for prioritizing repairs for the building and for us to know that we're spending money in the most strategic way if we issue a letter of offer to support your project. We're very concerned about not treading on the toes of the statutory protections for buildings. So if a building is a protected structure, that's great. It's already demonstrated that it's a really important part of the heritage. But if you're planning to make major changes to it, you will need planning permission. And it's highly unlikely that you'll get planning permission in the short time window where we're giving funding for a works project. So if your changes to a building are significant and require planning permission, we'd like to see the planning permission. If you're making minor changes that look like repairs and maintenance, there is a facility to get a declaration from the planning authority that shows that the repairs are exempted development. And again, we really need to see this. We'd like to see it before, when you apply. If you don't have it at the time that you apply to us for a grant, we will need to see it before the works commence. So we'd really need to know that that what you're doing is in line with and is approved by the planning authority. It's also a really good way of getting a conservation officer engaged with the project to perhaps come out and visit the building and give you informal advice and guidance as well. A really important part of conservation theory is minimum intervention, doing as little as possible, but as much as necessary. And I've just replied to a query in the chat about the replacement of a door. And I would say that if you do minimum intervention, heritage aims are being aligned with sustainability aims. We're proving that heritage is sustainable. If we hold on to the things that we have, if we make use of them, and if we repair them and amend them and adapt them so that they can continue to be used. They say the most environmentally benign building is the one that doesn't have to be built because it already exists. So we'll be applying that principle to even to the parts of a building that might be in distress and that you're looking at. So minimum intervention, really important. Show us that the proposal that you're putting to us, the project, is a minimum intervention. And if it's minimum intervention, it also scores highly as value for money, good value for money. We like to see a conservation supervisor in relation to a project. This again gives us assurance that the condition report, the heritage value has been taken into account, and that as the project progresses, as the plaster is taken off the wall and something else shows, that someone who has experience of dealing with these mini crises that occur in a project is there to hand to advise on the modifications of the terms without moving away from the overall objective, which is conservation. So we do like to see a good conservation supervisor. And there are, I'm an architect by training, and Amanda mentioned the RIAI Conservation Register this morning, but engineers and building surveyors also can provide conservation expertise within their professions. I mentioned the architectural conservation officers, but there are also heritage officers, and they've been mentioned this morning as well, as sources of information and advice for heritage projects. If you can describe your intended project to them and get them to provide a letter of support, that's very useful and reassuring to us when it comes through in the grant application. You can also talk to me in advance of projects, although I'd be betraying my organization if I told you you were going to get money for a project. I can give you disinterested and objective advice about projects. I can't prevent you from applying or guarantee that you'll be successful, but you can contact me by email or by phone. And indeed, I'll be doing my level best to answer questions in the questions and answer box when I've shut up and finished talking here. Good advisors and good builders are important for a project. And one set of questions that I can't answer is, and we were precluded from answering, is to say who you should use. We can't tell you that. That will be preferring one supplier over another, and that will be the government acting unfairly. So we can't do that. But we do point to registers where there are lists of people who can provide services in relation to building conservation. And I think we've got some of them on our website under our traditional building skills section. I'll check that as soon as I've finished now, but it's very important that we provide this disinterested information about contacts, but they're not endorsements. So it is your responsibility to go off and find a good builder and someone who's competent to do the job and who through the description of the services is showing us that that's the case. You need to get prices and assure yourself that you're not spending too much or indeed too little on conservation advice. Give yourself time to get to trust someone who you might be seeking for conservation advice. Do you know them? Do they answer the questions? Do they come to the building? Do they charge a fee before they do so, etc. Some are bad value, and it is your responsibility to ensure that they charge a reasonable price and provide a reasonable service, and you can find someone else to do it if you're uncomfortable. A question came up this morning about converting a building into a cafe. And first of all, that's a big project. It requires a lot of permissions normally. But secondly, that's not a conservation project. It is something that we are interested in. We want to see our heritage being used. It is important. And if our heritage is being used, there's a whole load of people who now have a vested interest in ensuring that it's maintained and repaired into the future. So if we contribute to a project that lends itself to reusing a building, we're going to think that's good value for money. But we're not going to pay for the plumbing or the electricity. We're paying for the conservation of the building. And that distinction is important to make. So do tell us how you're going to adaptively reuse a building if it's currently underused or not in use at all. That's part of the good story of your project. But we can't pay for the new functionality bits. We're paying for the conservation of the old bits. And I think that might help to clarify how you describe what you're trying to do to us in a way that will allow us to support what you're trying to do. There was a lot of questions this morning about project budgets, and they're very important in relation to building works. Building projects are scary, they're costly, there's no getting around it. And they're hard to manage in terms of money for everyone, for the builder, for the architect, and for the client. So we're trying to input some money into that process from the top, and we have even less control over it than that. But we, as a result, in the corollary is that we want to have a clear idea of how money is being spent. So if you want to restore a church organ and you've got a quote of 160,000 euros, and you ask us to provide 15,000 euros, we're not sure that restoring 3 pipes or the keyboard is getting us very far in relation to that project. So it's too big, and it's not divisible into fractions, into a fraction where an achievable amount can be achieved with the amount of money we could possibly offer within the timeframes of the grant process, which end in September of this year. So bite off what you can chew and show us what that bit is. So if you're doing a big project, you're ambitious and you want to apply for Built Heritage Investment Scheme money or Heritage Structures at Risk funding, great, but show us the little bit that you think the Heritage Council can help with. And that makes it easier for us to evaluate our positive contribution to your project. And at the end of the project as well, to help us to see that what we offered money for is actually completed, and that we can hand over the money on the basis that the work you said you were going to do is done. So that's important. Break a project down into pieces that are small and are scaled to the size of the grants that we want. Now, we are offering you, if you're successful, we'll be offering you money for a conservation project. We're reasonably flexible about how that works through the year. Again, as I said, you might lift a floorboard and discover there's dry rot and you had no idea that it was there, and the project needs to change because that's a more fundamental problem. But first of all, we would like to see a comprehensive condition report, and that helps to avoid these things emerging. But secondly, we're not completely unreasonable. And if you tell us that you are proposing to change the project in advance, and signal it to us, and that will usually be by way of an email to grants@heritagecouncil.ie, which Amanda most likely will receive. You can also send it to me, cmurray@heritagecouncil.ie, but the two of us together must be registered in the grant system. We'll try to appraise those works and see if they fall within the scope of what we're trying to achieve through helping you in conservation, and the project changes direction slightly, and that'll be okay. But that's part of responsible financial management of a project, and it's important to do. So we're not completely inflexible. We do want to see a clearly defined project at application stage, all the same. Public engagement has in the past been a bit of a challenge for people who are totally focused on doing a building project. Isn't that complicated enough? And you want me to tell the public about it? Well, we've provided a booklet on our grants page, and I put that in the chat this morning, the link to it. I can't give you a link directly to it, but you'll find it in our traditional skills page and homeowners page, a booklet on bringing the public into building conservation projects. And I hope that some of the ideas in that emerge in the applications that you might make to our grant scheme in this spring, so that we can be assured that the building project and the sense of the importance of conservation work is shared with people in your community, people on your Facebook page, on social media, Twitter, or people who might be trying to learn skills, if it's possible at all, to share that experience with people. So we talk about hard hat tours, if it's possible to do that in these COVID times, online or on-site seminars, workshops, and so on. The big topics of conversation are the wins that you can talk about in relation to one of your projects or a project you're applying for, are skills that you're going to help to stimulate skills, help people to learn them or appreciate them. The possibility that your project can discover more about our heritage. Sometimes you take off the wallpaper and there staring at you is a medieval chimney or a window or something. And discovery can be quite exciting. A facelift, sometimes the painting of a building in a public place and removing the buddleia from the gutters and the chimneys and giving it that subtle, happy face of a clean and wanted building, that in its own small way is part of raising awareness and appreciation and engaging the public in a building project. And bringing a building back into use and restoring its functionality is also part of that. But that happens at the end of a project, not when the conservation works are being done. So that might be harder to demonstrate. I hope I haven't run out of time yet. One or two last things I'd really like to talk about. There's a thing called a conservation plan, and that's not just some plan to do with conservation. In my little world, it's code. And it relates to a thing called the Borough Charter. And it's a very specific thing and a very precious and strategic approach that you can take to taking care of a place, bigger than a building. The places, all the things that people feel important about a certain location. So a conservation plan is about describing all the heritage values of a place, of getting as many people as possible to make their contribution to what they think that is, figuring out if there are conflicts between those different points of view and how you would resolve them, figuring out what threats there are to that place. They might be entirely external, climate change, for example, and figuring out what policies need to be put in place to send that place into the future with all of the things that are wonderful about it intact. So I constantly recommend conservation plans as an early and strategic way to get to grips with a special place, a place that you feel is important and special, bringing people on board. And if you do a conservation plan, you're also figuring out, when you're figuring out the threats and the policies, what are the most important things to address first, and what's the comprehensive list of things that need to be done, so that we can help you work your way through that list of things in order to achieve the conservation of that place. It's really great stuff. I think someone asked about, do we pay for reports? This is the type of report that we would be looking at. Another set of questions came up about energy use in buildings. And this is we're going to experience what's called the renovation wave as we try to minimize the amount of energy that our buildings, including our old buildings, use. And we're very interested in this problem in the Heritage Council. We're going to be training architects and engineers about how to do this as sensitively as possible. There's a great dearth of case studies about this at the moment. And we have said that we will pay for condition reports on the energy performance of traditionally built buildings. Now, again, as I said, it's hard for us to pay for just for the insulation, put it like that. But if you couch it in terms of appraising the appropriateness of the works that you're proposing to do, committing to monitoring the outcomes, or looking at alternative ways in which to use energy in a building, or to minimize, to save energy in a building, and then selecting one. That is the type of project where it might generate a case study that we'd be very interested in. And in fact, at least one applicant last year responded to this call and provided us with a very, very useful report, which may become a case study in national guidance next year, or this year, sorry, 2022. I'll mention a few other things. We're very preoccupied with traditional building skills training. If it's possible to build that into a project, that's great. Climate change, adaptation and mitigation are also very important to us. As I say, I think that the conservation plan approach is the most constructive way to prepare a place for a threat such as climate change, and as well as everything else that could possibly happen to it. So maybe that's the best way to address that. And yeah, one last thing, and this is getting a bit detailed now. There's a revolution that has gone on for the last 20 years in the materials that we put in between stones when we're doing repairs. It turns out that cement is too hard for heritage, and that lime mortars are actually a very environmental material and a very historically accurate material. So we'd be expecting at this stage that if you're doing any repairs to masonry work, that you will be specifying lime mortar as the material in which the repairs are carried out. And we'll hold you to it as well. Like, it's really important. It's the really important material. So if you say cements or cement plasters or anything like that, we'll be saying, why would we do that? So we'd like to be seeing lime mortars mentioned in your specifications for those works. So if I haven't used up all my time, I'd be delighted to answer any questions, Valerie.
You have 6 minutes, Colm. So thank you so much for that. We had a couple of questions come in regarding buildings in private ownership. Are they eligible to apply for the scheme?
Well, I made that comment right at the start because I think this is a yes or no question. We're not funding buildings in private ownership. This is a community heritage grant scheme. And I said that a heritage community doesn't actually have to possess a building, they don't have to have the title deeds, but it does have to be in some way public and owned by them. And I gave the counter example of a cottage on a farm, or something that is only a house or was a house and is now a ruin. We won't be able to help with that because it's not a community project. So a church is a community project where there's a large group of people and it's a public building. I'm not sure we'll deal with other versions of that in more detail, but I think we have to give general guidance on that.
Okay, we've had a couple of different questions come in around the conservation reports and the condition reports. Do they have to be completed by a conservation specialist, or can the organisation do this themselves? Can they apply for a conservation report to be commissioned? Who is qualified to provide a condition report, in this case on renovating a graveyard? Who would we contact, or are you getting a conservation plan done? And does the grant cover surveys? They're kind of all in the same realm.
Well, you may have to, I'm going to dive into the detail of that and you'll have to pull me back out and remind me of the other parts of the question. But yes, in principle, an applicant can do a condition report. Anyone can. It's about an objective appraisal of the building. Now, it will be informed by, it'll be a better appraisal if it's done by an expert. If someone can tell whether a leaky gutter has caused years worth of damage to the interior of a building, or whether it's only superficial because it happened last winter. I'm giving away my secrets now as an architect, but like the expertise will count. But we're very open to people taking the initiative and showing us that they are being responsible or thorough about building. So in principle, yes, the applicant can do a condition report, but we'll be looking at the photographs as well, and we'll be making up our own minds about how we think the building is doing. Give me another part of that question now, Valerie, so I won't dwell just on one thing.
No, you covered it pretty much there. The only other thing was, can this grant be used to commission a conservation report?
Yeah, well, the types of reports, the conservation plan, we feel is a long-standing or strategic and long-term value in taking care of a place. In fact, on heritage maps, we've put a pin wherever we know a conservation plan has been carried out. And I would see them as kind of like magnetic poles for value in the future. If you've done a conservation plan, you've proven that you've answered a lot of questions, strategic questions about that place, and you've identified what needs to be invested in it in the short, medium, and long term. And they can be fantastic from that point of view. So that's the first and foremost type of report that we'd be recommending. And you can spend 30 grand on a conservation plan if you want, or you can do it on one side of a sheet of paper if you do those few steps that I've mentioned there. And we'll go over them again some other time. But a condition report, yes, if it's a complex building, yes, and it seems to us to need this strategic outset kind of review to see what's going wrong or going on with it. Yeah, I think we might pay for that. We might help to grant aid to that.
Okay. Would Canal Infrastructure qualify if not state-owned? So your locks, bridges, lockkeepers' cottages, things like that.
Well, Waterways Ireland are, I think, in charge of most of the canals in Ireland. I'm not sure if there's someone there who owns one that Waterways Ireland doesn't own. But they have a heritage plan. It's fantastic. And they have a grant scheme as well of their own, which I think is open now. So with canals, I think if they're not in the ownership of Waterways Ireland, then let us know about it. But I think Waterways Ireland might be really good at, as a public body, proactive in heritage in taking care of those things.
Great. That's brilliant, Colm. That brings us up to your 30 minutes just about. But I will leave any unanswered questions in the Q&A box. So if you want to type answers to people there, you can. So that's great. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Lorcan. So I will spotlight you, Lorcan. And you're good to go.
Thanks very much. Well done, Colm. That was very comprehensive. You'll probably see some commonality with some of the issues I have highlighted. I've done a short PowerPoint. Now there's 3 or 4 slides. So it's really just an aid memoir for me. And oh God, I have something.
Sorry, Lorcan, you're muted there, I think.
Yeah, it must be.
There we go, yeah. So we got the presentation.
Very good. Well, that's the main thing. As I say, it's just an aid memoir to help me run through this. This has been recorded, so if you need to refer back, hopefully it'll prompt you in some of that. Moving people around here, hope I don't use myself again. So yeah, given there's limited resources, this is, you should think of it as a competition, and it's not a statement about the merits of any plan or project that you have. We would love to fund all projects, and in many cases they are very important, be it locally, nationally, or internationally at some points as well. We're allocating state funds, so a bit like what Colm was saying, the community is the most important aspect of this particular funding stream. And, we're not looking to fund maybe a housing estate to increase the pollinators by planting flowers or something like that. That's, a different project altogether. So we're looking for something that has community benefit. Be thinking about how you can, you can be, because we're using state funds, the project that you're thinking about, how that fits into government policy. So, we're thinking about the National Biodiversity Action Plan, All Ireland Pollinator Plans, Climate Action Plans. So some of the work that you're thinking about will absolutely fit into actions under these plans. So it's worth having a look at them and shout it from the rooftops that you are actually using state funds to support government policy on that. That can be very helpful. If you do already have a local biodiversity action plan, I know the Community Foundations for Ireland had a funding stream there for local biodiversity action plans. If you have something like that or have done one yourselves under a different funding stream, indeed the previous heritage funding grants, what you're looking to be funded now is part of a wider plan. That will all be looked at much more favourably if we know that it's strategic, that you're not just dreaming of projects to chase money, that you're very focused in what you're hoping to do. Now, here we go. Okay, so we do get a lot of applications now for local biodiversity action plans to be funded, and that's good and proper. As I say, there is the Community Foundation for Ireland funding for exactly this, and if you've had funding under that previously, we won't be looking to look for an additional report on your action plan, but if you're delivering actions under that, that would certainly qualify. If you are looking to start from the beginning for your own local biodiversity action plan, we would be looking that you would use the methodology and the processes that are agreed under the Community Foundation for Ireland scheme. Now, their methodology isn't as yet up on their website, but I've been speaking to them and they hope to have that done in the next week or two. At the moment, you don't need to know anything about it, but if you're taking on an ecologist to deliver this report, and it should be by an ecologist, we will be looking for their methodology to be used. That will give additional value to the collection of local biodiversity action plans around the country. So that's very useful as well. We would also look at any of the information that you gather in relation to that is offered to the National Biodiversity Data Centre. Again, that gives us additional use and value to the project. And it should be by a competent ecologist. We won't be identifying what a competent ecologist is. It will be up to you to demonstrate that the person that you're employing to carry out that report has the capacity to do so, and should be able to demonstrate that in the application form. And again, that it isn't somebody within the community doing a one-man show or one-person show, that they have community support. That should be demonstrated in the application as well. I've mentioned if you've already had a biodiversity action plan, let us know about that. If you are, okay, so sorry, I'm running ahead of myself here. So yeah, these are just some suggestions of successful applications that tend to come within these 5 broad headings. So we have the community or local biodiversity action plans. Species and habitat surveys are very useful. Again, we would absolutely put it in as a condition that the data of that will go to the National Biodiversity Data Centre. Habitat restoration, invasive species eradication tend to be another very popular area that communities want to get involved with. We'd be very keen to support these. Again, you know, to show that if it's an invasive species eradication, that if it's in a special area conservation or something like that, that's very important to show that you've understood that, you know, you may need a license to do the works. Same with habitat restoration, if it's a designated bog or something, that you've got prior permissions for that. Biodiversity and education awareness tends to be another big area, and we would be keen to support that. Again, you know, remember that it would have to be quite a strong application here, that it's not education awareness in a very small area. I mean, everyone's community is important, so we're not looking for you to cover a province or anything like that, but that it uncovers as many people as possible, or groups that would traditionally fall outside of traditional education and awareness streams. So, you know, think outside the box there a bit to strengthen your application. And then the other one would be support for wildlife rehabilitation work. And again, you know, that's quite a specialised area now that needs a licence from the National Parks and Wildlife Service. So make sure that you have covered that in your application. I have a summary here then of some of the points that tend to go up. So do make contact with your local authority heritage officer. Some local authorities now have biodiversity officers, and there's more due to come on stream. So ask to see if they have a biodiversity officer, but absolutely your heritage officer would be a must when you're looking to see if the actions that you're proposing might be covered already in a county biodiversity action plan or in the wider heritage plan. So if you're delivering for the county, that obviously will be looked on more favourably than if it isn't you know, covered at all in the heritage plan or the biodiversity action plan. So that would be a help. And then even nationally, you know, there are actions under the current one comes to an end this year or last year. So they're coming together with the new biodiversity action plan. That's no problem. We're working with the one that's published. So if you feel that you are delivering for the National Biodiversity Action Plan, even in a very small community way, that's brilliant. That's what we want to hear. You can also think of Heritage at the Heart, the Heritage Council's current strategy. It'd be worth looking at that to see if you can add value to our strategy. If it's something to do with protected species or habitat, you should contact your National Parks and Wildlife Service ranger. There's a question in the application that if the project may impact on a designated site, a European designated site in particular, these SACs or SPAs, and a lot of people would tend to take the action, no, we're just putting up a board or something like that. You know, that question needs a bit more attention. because even by just putting up an information board of that, you could be bringing more people to a sensitive area that has rare plants or sensitive breeding site for birds or something like that. So we would like a bit more attention rather than just ticking the box to say, well, we're just putting up a sign, there'll be no impact on the site there. Have a think about it, ask your ranger, are they okay with it? And that's that covered. Is there a project site or adjoining sites? Yeah, so again, it's the same point I'm making. Sometimes the impact might be for a walk or something like that. It may not be in a designated site, but it could bring implications for the adjoining site. So again, your heritage officer, your biodiversity officer or ranger will help you with that question. And usually it's no, you know, but it is good to demonstrate where you can that you've thought about the question and that you're answering it comprehensively, because they're the questions that we'll have when we're doing the assessment. Again, very similar to other people's questions, where do I find a professional ecologist? So again, we won't be recommending anybody if you're getting onto me, but I would direct you to the Charter of Environmental Managers. They're on .net there. It's a UK and Ireland organisation, so they'll be a help. I will look as a condition, if you're grant aided under biodiversity and habitat recording, that the data goes to, it's offered at least to the biodiversity data centre. If it's mapping, we would also look for it to be offered to heritagemaps.ie. That's very useful to add value to that website. And it's worth looking at heritagemaps.ie if you're looking at a biodiversity project, if you're particularly looking at species and habitats, to demonstrate, you know, how your local area fits in with the national picture. That's very helpful. And again, will your spend be in common good? So drawing back on the fact that this is a community funded project, so demonstrating that it has common good for your area and the wider public is important. And then, yes, we do ask for the project to be highlighted during Heritage Week, but also now National Biodiversity Week. The dates for these are May 15th to the 22nd. And that helps in relation certainly with schools. If you have a schools element that you can use, you have additional week there or 10 days in May. I do know that somebody asked a question. Now I have something else under everyone else's. I'll move that up there. Oh yeah. So we do get applications each year for purchase of equipment for recording species and habitats. So we are looking nationally at supplying at a county level to start with field clubs and libraries in 2022. So if you're looking for the purchase of bat detectors or field cameras, things like that, you know, that might go down the list of priorities for us if we're going to supply them to the wider public where you can access them. That gives us much more additionality that we know the equipment can be accessed by other groups and that. So just to bear that in mind. Yeah, no, I had a question this morning about biodiversity projects that occur in winter. So we would have that situation in relation to waders and wintering birds and that. So we are aware that it can be a problem if you're to get it done by December. And the best, you know, unfortunately, because the Heritage Council budget has to end in December, the project that you're proposing to do has to be paid for out of this calendar year. So that's just something it is worth, if you're looking to do work in autumn, winter, to ensure that the work that you're proposing to do can be done before closing date. If there's additional work that carries on into the winter, you know, you are hoping that you will get most of your funding done out of this year, and that the benefit of what you paid for this year will carry you over the line. But do certainly come back to me online or with an email, and we'll see where we can help there to get best value out of that. So I think that is me. Thank you very much for listening. I'm certainly happy to take any questions there you want to throw at me.
Thanks a million, Lorcan. That's brilliant. We have a couple of questions here, and if anyone else has any other questions, do pop them into the Q&A because we have a bit of time to get to them. So one person has asked, is work for farmland and peatland birds, so barn owl, red grouse, etc., eligible? This would involve habitat creation, in particular creating linear hedge, feature planting, installation of barn owl boxes, etc. fall into this as well as part of the monitoring equipment for a 1 to 4 year period by specialist. Would this pass for the funding?
Okay, so there's a lot going on there, as we can hear. And we would certainly, it is a project we'd look to support. The elements of funding in a calendar year looks like there's a bit more work to be done on that. And phasing, we don't have multi-annual funding there. Obviously, their work will carry on for 4 years. Maybe it's a case where we can bite off a chunk of that work that can be funded in this calendar year. They may have to apply for more next year, or, whatever we can get done this year will carry over into next year, something like that. But they need to bear in mind that, whatever they get funded for this year is for this year and must be spent this year. The work can carry on, obviously, after that, and hopefully will. And it might be a case of phasing the work there. In terms of planting hedgerows and that, again, it would have to be on public land. We cannot support people in relation to creating ponds on their private land, creating hedgerows on their private land, barely putting up nest boxes. We could possibly achieve that because the nature of the birds moving and that, but creating habitats on private land isn't a facility that we have, unfortunately.
And I suppose in keeping with that, if there is a situation where a community group has, say, a 4 or 5 year plan, should they include details of all of that in their application, or just this year specifically?
Well, what they're looking to, the actions that they're proposing to do for this calendar year, for under this scheme, that's what we need to focus on. But it is brilliant to have the wider context, that they have a strategy, that they have a plan, that this will feed into a much bigger picture. That's ideal to have.
Okay. We had a question there. Can a project include primary school workshops? I suppose we're getting into the heritage in schools.
Certainly with primary schools.
There.
Yeah. So I'm not saying no, but the priority for that would drop greatly there.
I would say no, sorry to intervene, because a good chunk of our funding does go towards the Heritage in Schools programme, so it definitely wouldn't be a priority.
Okay. There's a question here for you, Lorcan, about a concern at the weight given to biodiversity projects, given that in the past 5 years, few biodiversity projects have been funded. Can you explain how to increase the competitiveness of biodiversity projects as a group under this funding scheme? For example, as a small group, we don't own, lease, or manage any property.
Okay, well, again, a lot going on in that question. I mean, I would refuse that biodiversity projects haven't got their share of funding, certainly since I've joined now in 2019 on, but that's parking all of that. We are looking for a whole range of things because we've a limited pot of money. So some of it will be geography, some of it will be built natural cultural heritage, getting a decent spread. The fact that it's a small local community that don't manage lands and that isn't important to us. So it's the quality of the project and how it will impact. That impact can be local, national, or international. If it's best practice and demonstrates that, that will certainly be reflected in our scores.
Just to add to that, Lorcan, I would agree. It's the projects are assessed based on the information provided. They're not weighted, like an architectural project isn't weighted against a biodiversity project and so on. They're scored and assessed based on the significance of the project and what it can achieve. So if the person who posed the question is concerned that there hasn't been due weight given to them, that hasn't been the case. Perhaps maybe we haven't had as many applications for biodiversity. So here's your chance to apply than maybe for built heritage or archaeology, but they're not competing against each other in terms of discipline.
Absolutely.
The question here about creating wetlands and ponds, would that be eligible for funding?
Yeah, but bear in mind again that it has to have the community element to it, that if you're creating a pond, it's not in somebody's private land in a farm at the back that nobody can see. If it's adding to the community biodiversity and that, and they can demonstrate it strongly enough, it may happen to be on private land, but its impact is for the community. We can take that into consideration, but again, it's to get the best competitiveness, it should be on publicly owned land, you know, and that is the bar we're looking for.
Okay. We have a question here about mink traps. Would there be any funding for mink traps? As this person says, they trap between 10 to 20 per year, and the traps are not cheap.
They're not cheap. I know we have supported programs that use mink traps. So, you know, the Curlew project and the Partridge project, you know, all involved invasive species control and that. So again, if you're making an application, you'll have to demonstrate that the impact will have a, you'll be able to show that you're in competition with other projects is really what I'm saying. It's not that it isn't a consideration at all for us. It's not something that we wouldn't support, but yeah, it would be in the pot with everything else, and you know, its impact can, and it's just tricky to demonstrate. You know, if you catch 20 mink or whatever, that's brilliant, but the benefit for the wider habitats and species is harder to demonstrate. That's really what I'm saying.
Yeah, makes sense. We have a question here that applies to what you've said, but also to the funding in general. We've been asked, is there a document available showing the priority funding areas for the Heritage Council for 2022 over and above the details provided with the application docs? Alternatively, are there national policies which we should reference that will score highly in the assessment process?
Well, again, that's where I'm asking people to, you know, to demonstrate, to show that they've made reference to documents like the National Biodiversity Action Plan, County Biodiversity Action Plans, Heritage Plans, and indeed the Heritage Council's own strategy, Heritage at the Heart. So they will demonstrate where the priorities are currently. As I say, there's a new National Biodiversity Action Plan coming, but until it arrives, we are working off the one that's currently published.
And I suppose for anyone, oh, sorry, go on, Amanda.
I was just going to add, where it comes down to shortlisting and scoring, where more than likely we will have to do this year, based on the amount of good applications we receive, we often look at the communications section as a way of weighting as well. So if you have a strong communication section and your project is going to impact a greater reach in terms of accessibility, we'll say for people with disabilities, or an audience that may not normally be involved in your local heritage, then that project would outweigh another similar project. So the communication section is a good one to concentrate as well in terms of added value and you know, long-term impact.
And I would add to that as well, if anyone is unsure of where to get access to particular documents or anything like that, or any of the strategic plans, you can always reach out to your local heritage officer or biodiversity officer if your local authority has one, or you can also always contact me. As I said earlier, the easiest way to get me is if you just reply to the invitation email for this, then it'll go straight to me, or you can get me on vkelly@heritagecouncil.ie. So one other small area that, well, it's a big area, but you could also look to the strategic development goals. You know, we would always be looking to support that as well. Brilliant. Well, that's all our questions answered. And we have about 5 minutes before Leslie Ann is going to get started on care of collections for us. Just to make sure that we stay to the schedule, I won't start early in case some people are coming back in specifically for Leslie Ann's section. I don't want them to miss out. So what I will do is I will stop the recording